I'm going to do my best to deviate from the stock advice related to characters and creating compelling characters. Let's start with the basics. When it comes to creating your character, whether you want them to be a side character or a primary character, it is important to understand the basics of that character. The least interesting part of our characters is going to be the physical description of them. Appearance can be interesting and sometimes necessary to the plot and other story elements, but we really need to establish the basics that make them them. We need to understand the beliefs, the backstory, and the purpose of that character as it relates to your story, themes, and plot. Targeting these elements will not only make your character feel more fleshed out and real in the context of your story, but will also really tie them to your plot, your setting, and the themes that you are exploring in your story.
But you didn't say anything to me. You didn't do anything to me.
Well, that's what I was thinking, like.
I just don't like you no more.
The cohesion between these elements is perhaps the most important part that your character is going to play, helping them stand out on their own and feel integral to the story. Everyone and every character has some sort of belief structure or a loose process of how they understand the world they inhabit. The belief system that we have and that our characters have determines and justifies our actions, thoughts, and interpretations of the world around us. Consider what your character believes is true, but also what they disagree with. The beliefs of your character will often be a great reflection point of the themes of your story and help with world building certain elements that might be left up to interpretation. The reader does not need to know every stance that they hold, but be sure to incorporate their beliefs to specific plot elements, the themes of your story, and the setting. All of this should come up naturally and not feel forced in any one scene. The beliefs of your characters can be a great point to create conflict and plant the seed of tension between other characters, themselves, and also the world around them. When it comes to our character's backstory, when we think of our characters, a lot of the times the first thing that comes up that we have either considered before or look forward to implementing is our character's backstory. This can be the origin story of a character or just the first steps that we take to developing them to where they are at the current point in the story. However, when it does come to implementing that backstory on the page, timing is key, and oftentimes less means more. A slow drip of information about a character can often be more poignant, as well as keeping a character interesting to the reader and create a great deal of interest and momentum behind that character. Like an onion.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers.
We want to see the layers of this character, rather than a laundry list of descriptors, points of origin, and the stances that they might hold, whether it be a main character or side character. The backstory of your character is where we can really start to justify some of their actions and positions, as well as create a great deal of sympathy for them. This will also make your character feel unique amongst all the other characters. We all come from somewhere, and although we may share similar experiences, places that we're from, or even friends and family, the way in which we interpret and digest that backstory will be different from anybody else's experience. Really try to consider where that character is from and what they've been through, and then how this shapes them into the person that they are today. This is where you'll see very common the character ghost get brought up. And remember, in this case, less is always going to be more, especially when it comes to interest for a character and tension around a character. I tend to lean much more towards purpose over personality, as personality tends to find itself or manifest itself through the beliefs and backstories of our characters. However, this is where we can start to formulate the different personality types using tools like Enneagrams, Myers-Briggs, or the 16 personality types. The personality of each character should stand out amongst the cast of characters you've created. If there are too many characters that feel or are the same personality-wise, your cast will likely feel bland. Often if this happens, we should look back to our first basic building blocks and see how we can help implement unique beliefs and backstories to tweak and change and make their current personality feel unique as well as necessary to the plot and story. With all that being said, the purpose of a character, though, is perhaps the most important element. Consider here what your wants, your needs, and your desires are for their character. And then we can start to see how this might shape and influence our plot and theme. Ask yourself, what are the things that they want or need, and how can you prevent them or give them those things throughout your story? As we start to figure out the basic building blocks of a certain character, at some point we're going to want to consider the arc that character is going to go through for your story. When it comes to building our character's arc, there are many different options that we can pick from. But seeing as this isn't a character arc video, I'm only going to touch on the basic 3, as well as talking about the purpose of a character arc. The first one that might come to mind is a positive arc that our character might go through, where our character goes through some sort of positive change. There's also the flat arc, where our protagonist knows the truth about them at the start, but does not change for better or for worse. And then we have the negative arc, where our character might go through some sort of transformation, but often for the worse in the end. Like I said before, this really only scratches the surface of character arcs. The biggest thing being is that your character is going to go through some sort of change or not, i.e. your flat arc. Character arcs are a key component to understanding the essence of our characters and really tying them to the plot as well as the themes of our story. A lot of the times we can factor in the pacing of our story as well to track the plot with the arc of our character. A lot of times we hear if a story is thematically compelling or if a plot had a really good payoff in the end. These commonly run in tandem with our character arcs or the character arc that is happening throughout the story. The arc of your character should have some sort of thematic payoff and will often echo or reflect the themes of your story. Briefly, using an example to tie sort of these 3 basic arcs, I'm going to use the theme of love, or more specifically, love is real, as it's pretty easy to conceptualize that way. So if our character starts with the concept that love isn't real, or they don't believe in soulmates, this being their starting belief, but by the end of the story, they believe in love, or let's say that they get married or find their soulmate. This would be our positive arc. For our flat arc, we have our character knowing that they can only love themselves, either to protect themselves from heartbreak or by some sort of jadedness to the idea of true love. Throughout the story, maybe they go through an experience of heartbreak or come to a point where they reinforce their original concept that love is not real, thus ending with the concept of I can only love myself, or again, believing that love isn't real. And then finally, we can have a negative arc by having a character believe that true love or soulmates exist, and then having a process of either heartbreak or something that shatters this belief, having them end with the thought or the emotion that true love does not exist or that there is no such thing as soulmates. I'm sure you can already start to see the nuances begin to develop and take shape within character arcs in general, even through these basic concepts and examples. Personally, this part of the drafting process is one of my favorites, as we can really start to see the shape of our narrative start to get developed around our character and their beliefs. As an example, I wrote a flat arc in my short story, Static Love, where the main character sort of talks about their approach to this virtual reality AI dating service. And by the end of it, their belief is not just reinforced, but they double down. And if you want to read the story, you can check it out down below. I also did an interview about it that I will link to as well, where we specifically talk about flat arcs being kind of risky to pull off, but also being satisfying and fun to write. When it comes to writing advice and tips around characters, including a strong position isn't one that I always see thrown out there. But I do find this one, once you see it and once you realize it, you can start to see how big of a role this can play in your story and in your narrative. Giving your characters a strong position or stance is a really good way to set the markers for points of conflict and opportunities to create tension on the page. And giving your character a strong position opposite to another character's position can offer endless opportunities for them to combat against one another in any way that you may see fit. Usually this strong position will be considered when we are addressing our basic building blocks. Typically, when we come up with a theme that we might want to explore, we will think of all of the different positions and beliefs around that theme. If you go back to the theme of believing in true love, we can think of all these different positions and personalities that might take a very strong stance, and then how we can pit those characters and those different stances against one another. It's really easy to then tie this strong stance that maybe manifested itself as a belief during the basic building blocks, to then tie it to your setting, themes, and the plot as a whole. A way this can really play a strong role in your setting and world is by considering what's important within your world and what people value that inhabit it. What beliefs, norms, customs, cultural elements, and other world-building features shape what our characters believe and what they hold to be true and not true. How this can help influence our plot is we can consider what does a certain character want, or what's their goal, and what do other characters want and what are their goals. Then we can consider what events or which of those characters will stop one another or provide the goal or want to another character. We can start to make our cast of characters and give other characters strong positions and stances that might conflict, stop, or assist one another in their ultimate goals, furthering the plot. And then themes. This can really play a role in your themes as a way to pick apart and really dive into the detail and deconstructing whatever your theme might be. This will help you explore your story with a bit more depth and challenge certain positions. Through your character or through your main characters, this can be a good opportunity for you to challenge, change, or reinforce your character's beliefs as it relates to the theme of the story. And what kind of feeds off that strong position will then be a great desire and a great opposition. We have the opportunity to write opposing beliefs, views, and characters against those great desires. But before we get ahead of ourselves, our great desire isn't necessarily the strong position that we just talked about before, but instead the manifestation of that into a goal or a want. The minute that we sort of understand this is the minute that we can really start to map on that ultimate goal or want onto our plot. But looking at how the great desire can help map on and even path out our character arc is usually the first step in seeing this manifestation take place. Typically, we've all heard of the wants, needs, and desires. And this trio is really helpful in developing or acting as a device to guide our character through their arc in our story, especially in a 3-act structure. And briefly speaking on those three things, the want is usually the thing that our character thinks that they need or the goal they think that they have, but is instead a lie in terms of our story, where the need is the thing or the concept that will actually help our character achieve their goal or fulfill their arc. And then the desire is more intermediate truths and lies throughout your story. Knowing what our great desire is for our character or characters is when we can start to really put those roadblocks into our plot and start to challenge their beliefs that we talked about earlier. And these roadblocks are going to be what your opposition or your great oppositions are. The great oppositions are going to be points in our story that trigger that changing moment in our character's arc, or trigger that moment in our character that makes them then reinforce their original beliefs. Either having them believe the lie that they thought to be true in the beginning, or changing and realizing the truth of their narrative. I think it's important to remember that although we may try to make our characters as real feeling as we can, these are characters. And these elements of seeing change happening or seeing change not happen is important in creating and developing characters that resonate with your themes, your plot, and your setting. It's the culmination of all of these elements that really make up the art and science of writing compelling characters. Just as a quick kind of wrap up of this topic, it's funny, of all the others, I think characters is the most expansive and the hardest to not dive all the way in and become a 4-hour-long video on the art and science of developing characters. But I tried to touch on some of the lesser spoken about elements of creating characters, but also tried to touch on those baseline elements just to sort of open you up and expose you to some of those concepts. I foresee myself going into a little more detail on some of these things, especially character arcs, and even those 3 sort of basic character arcs, as they're a lot of fun to explore, and knowing when to use certain ones can elevate your story a lot. That's all to say. If you found this video useful, feel free to give it a like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out. But also comment down below. Let me know what you're wrestling with. I always love to hear what you all are working on and some of the struggles and successes that you're finding with your own writing. That's all to say. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.